everyone, and welcome back to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today we have Mr. Jason Lavigne. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me today.
So first things first, Jason, I wanted to thank you for inviting me over to your show. That was the first time I've ever been on anything mainstream, so thank you.
Mainstream. I'm flattered you call it that, but no, I'm a little humble show, and I was really excited to have you because you did a great review of the Mosley decision and you put it online. So I felt you were an educator, you knew what you're talking about, and that's exactly what I look for on my show.
Well, I'm happy you guys didn't boot me off after the first 15 minutes. So thanks.
No way.
Jason, my goal in bringing you on today is obviously I want to interview you, but I want the rest of Canada to know who you are and what you're doing, because I think it's amazing. You're a citizen that's actually stepped up. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run?
Sure. It's a pretty loaded question, but I can get there for you. I'm basically a nerd. So when I was born, I came out in the late 70s. I had a Commodore VIC-20, and I started to program right out of the gate. I did that for 20 years professionally before I kind of moved my family out west to raise them in the Alberta lifestyle. So I was behind the scenes, introvert, a technology guy, didn't really get into the public life much, other than I had some entrepreneurial experience and some community building around that out in Ontario. A little grassroots organizations to help small businesses connect with technology and build up from there. It was a lot of fun. But out in Alberta, I wanted to just homestead, to start raising my family, homeschool, do all of that. And then the convoy happened. The first time in a while, we were very excited and proud to be Canadian because we shared a lot of the same ideas and had some of the same frustrations as the gentlemen and women that were making their way out to Ontario and showing Ottawa that we actually have a voice. Unfortunately, yes, the outcome of that was the invocation of the Emergencies Act, and fellow Canadians got booted and put into the snowbanks and shipped out of the town, the city of Ottawa, our capital. And that bothered me a lot. Trudeau came on the screen, and in French, en français, he said to Canadians, if you don't like what I did here, one way to deal with that is to run against me. Go ahead and become a candidate and come and have your say. And I took that to heart, because I don't listen to a lot of Trudeau statements, but that one I heard loud and clear. And I said, you know what? He may have a point on this one, because this is how Canada can stand up, is by running against him and actually becoming an MP and taking the voice to the House of Commons. So that was the fire that ignited me in 2022 of February. And I haven't looked back since. I've been fighting very hard to build up a base of people who support me. Here are some of my messages as I work hard for constituents before an election even happens. By becoming an independent journalist, searching for the truth, interviewing people across the movement, all across Canada, great Canadians like yourself. And I do include you in there, even though you're a little humble about it. Your analysis of Mosley was outstanding. So thank you very much for that work there. And that's exactly what we're looking for, people just like you and I, who stepped up and said, Canada's worth it. We're not normally this type of person. We're not the public facing. And we certainly don't get labeled mainstream often, that's for sure. But I thought it was a good use of my time to go run as a candidate. I originally started with the PPC, so we'll get into how I had my journey there with the PPC. And ultimately, I've decided to go as an independent candidate, because I do believe that my neighbors deserve the strongest voice possible. It may be the toughest road there, but it certainly will let me get the voice directly from my neighbors to the House of Commons, where they need to be heard. It's about time Alberta, specifically my riding here west of Edmonton, Yellowhead, needs to be heard. So it's time we stand up. So I appreciate you bringing me on, because you and I have very similar ambitions to go ahead and bring our neighbors' voices forward. And that's what I'm trying to do here today with you.
Well, it's a fantastic story. And I think I mentioned this to you when I was on your show. One of the reasons that I decided to run was because you were running. And I don't know how I came across your podcast on Getter, but I was like, wow, like here's an ordinary guy who's not part of the the main, what do you call it, the uniparty, So
Right.
so you at least you motivated one person to try to do the right thing. So
Well, thank you very much for that. I've heard that a few times, even as far as the UK. So we have a gentleman out in the UK who's running as an MP after watching a few episodes. So I appreciate that that was your motivation.
yeah, and I find I'm not going to say I was involved with the convoy, but I supported them, and I did go to Ottawa. I arrived day late, and I still tried. But I think there's something about the patriotism. Like if you stand up for your country, other people appreciate it, and it's almost like praise becomes a currency amongst us. So
It does because there's not much other currencies around at this stage. Fundraising, support, the government does not help my media, that's for sure. So yeah, doing the right thing is a form of payment in currency around here, and it has to be because there's really no other reason to do this other than the next generation and to stand up for your country.
right, Jason. Can you tell us? I had a question about your writing. Can you go into details about, for example, demographics? What's the average age? I know this is a touchy subject, but what's the race, ethnicity? What kind of? I'm assuming is it a rural area? This is really for my own curiosity.
Sure. So west of Edmonton, Yellowhead is a hardworking riding with 100,000 people, mostly Christian, Caucasian, hardy people. We do have a diverse town in Drayton Valley, so you can certainly find all types of Canadians there, and we welcome everybody. It's a 5-hour tip to tip, so it's a very large rural riding, and it's one of those ridings where we have leaders. We actually produce quite a bit of leaders here. So Joe Clark, who was our prime minister one point was from Yellowhead, and Preston Manning, who did a lot of work with reform, came from Yellowhead as well. So we do have a history of bringing forward some leaders, especially in resistance or independent or even reform type of movements. But we are a strong conservative riding. The historic backing here is the Conservative Party. And we definitely have what we would call currently a lack of power when it comes to backbench, and we certainly want to have our voices heard because a few issues around farming, loans from the government, fertilizer, water, and other issues that are very important to our farmers here do not seem to be heard at this stage. So it is rural, lots of farmers, and we have a diverse community in Drayton Valley.
So before getting to your platform and your principles, how are you running your campaign, and how are you reaching out to members of the community?
Well, that's a two-part question. So the campaign will come later when the writs dropped and we actually get into the nitty-gritty of running a campaign. But until then, I'm building my base and my platform by becoming an independent candidate, reaching out to my neighbors and bringing forward the issues that are important to them, having the conversations that will entice them, and actually doing some of the work that I intend to do as an MP, which is to bridge various groups and to have a vast knowledge of exactly what Canadians are looking for, because that is the type of representative I want to be, the one that listens and then brings their message forward, and not necessarily bring forward my personal beliefs all the time. I certainly want to mix that in with my neighbors and their views. So that's why I think running as an independent allowed me to open the door to hear from everybody, all my neighbors. So whether you're traditionally a NDP or another party, I can listen and have conversations. And I've been demonstrating that with my platform by having various conversations, speaking to various types of people as part of a boot camp, getting ready for becoming an MP. That's why I'm demonstrating it with this particular program and the work I do, because I do intend to continue to do this as an MP, reach people, talk to people, listen to people, and bring forward strong, dynamic, and diverse actual, not beliefs, but ideas to the House of Commons.
I had a question about, let's label it as faith. I come from a more like an urban riding, so I'm in West Vancouver, which is a suburb of Vancouver. And what is the view of your riding towards the urban centers? Is it like a little bit of contempt? Is it total hatred? What?
Well, I'd say I actually have a unique perspective there because I actually spent about 20 years in the GTA, so the Greater Toronto Area, and I grew up in one of the largest cities in Canada. I basically had my early adult to before I had my family. I lived in that area, so I got to experience both sides of Canada, urban and rural. And I got to tell you, there's no resentment. There's just a lot of misunderstanding, and I think there's a lot of media-based or even government-based pitting against each other, causing us to actually have resentment. Deep down, there's a lot of Canadians that love this country, want to work hard for it, and have a lot of questions that the government doesn't always answer. And that's what I've found so far, inside of a city or outside of a city. People are having more questions for the government that they're not getting answers to. So I actually have a unique perspective there, where I've lived both sides.
Why do you think the government is not answering questions?
Because we're asking the tougher questions now. So usually we would have questions like security for the country and what's going on outside our borders when it comes to our federal government, at least. But now they take quite the interest inside the borders and work at being in our lives in a whole bunch of different ways. And those questions are a lot harder to answer. The justification of why you're spending your time, energy, and resources in my life on the federal government level isn't easy. And I think that's why sometimes they don't answer that question. And then another one is they don't actually have the answers. So we saw that with the convoy going to Ottawa to ask them to explain their mandates. They didn't have answers. And in hindsight, a couple of years after the fact, we're learning they certainly didn't have answers. The NCI helped expose that. The National Citizens Inquiry, the Mosley decision itself helped to answer that. You know that one well. And lots of lawsuits that are being formulated around some of the things that have come to fruition since then. So we're learning, even our government doesn't actually have the answers, which means we have to ask a lot louder, a lot clearer, and then get people in there who can actually get these answers for the people. Because right now, this particular government, they do not seem to be forthcoming when it comes to the truth and what we actually need to know.
What about you mentioned the mandates, the Vax Pass, the mandates, all the lockdown measures. What are your views on that? And like, what do you think it should have done, the government, or, as opposed to what it did do?
Okay, that's a tough one because at the beginning we all had no idea what was going on. So I would say that there's three distinct phases: very early, and then responding to what you know, and then maybe the cover-up. That'd be a phase that we deal with a little bit later here. But very early, not much different, to be honest with you, because the first month, I would say, we were responding, at least as citizens, well. But after the first 2 weeks of flatten the curve, and that wasn't working, and then we were getting flip-flop information, masks and otherwise, and then we had some data coming out as this thing was really starting to work its way around the world. That's when we started to have, I would call, the reacting phase, where we started to react to it instead of learn from it. So on a government level, it was to just do something. At one point, it wasn't to do something because. And that's where I think they kind of they diverged from where I would be wanting to see the government responding. At the beginning, when we don't know what's going on, we got to step up and do something. But quickly, one of the steps that you should be doing is analyzing what's going on, collecting information internally as much as you could, and then looking at it with your own people. I think taking a lot of government global guidance at that time was a mistake. I think the WHO, the UN, and other organizations who were feeding guidance to governments were moving too quick, or maybe have had other ways to handle situations, but not regionalized in a way that made sense for us. We're a large country, so dealing with the situation the way we didn't necessarily make sense. I wasn't a big fan of forced mandates. I do believe if you can persuade me, I can work with you. But if you try and force me, it becomes a problem. So I'm one of the ones that couldn't travel. I couldn't cross the border. I couldn't board airplanes. And I had to make do with my life at that time. But it definitely gave me an idea of what I didn't want in my government. And then again, using hindsight, we knew that lots of people had good information early. We've had some of the doctors who lost their licenses early, spoke up early. Some of the lawyers who spoke up early got in trouble. These particular people, they were the ones that had the good information. So I do kind of feel a little sympathetic to the government that early it was difficult, but I don't feel empathetic that they didn't know. At the point where they couldn't argue back or provide information, like medical science of any type, that's when we knew something else was up. That's why we had to stand up. That's why the truckers went to Ottawa, because they weren't being heard and something was wrong. We were hoping to get answers from the government at that stage, but in the lack of answers, we kind of figured out they don't have them. To kind of bring us back to our previous question, why don't they have the answers? In this particular case, because they didn't have them. So at that stage, I think the government started to flounder, do whatever they could, and then take it a little bit further. Maybe another agenda, maybe to see if we would comply. I'm not sure. We're still looking into all of those kind of questions. But we can say it wasn't for our medical health. Those answers have come out now. We can certainly see and look back that there were some poor decisions being made there, and possibly not even decisions within our own border. So if I would have one big takeaway, it would be an open decision-making mechanism within Canada when it comes to stuff like this, where we could absorb global information or allied information, but we have to make our own decisions.
Good answer. Jason, I'm going to ask an open-ended question, and you can go back as far as you want, and you can come back to it later on in the interview. You mentioned 2022. I believe you were talking about the trucker convoy, and when Trudeau gave you that ultimatum, and you're like, "Fine, I'll step up." You were born in Canada, correct?
Correct, Northern Manitoba.
So from the day you were born, or I don't know, your first memory, and like, how has Canada changed? The rate at which it's changed, and was there a point when you noticed, you stopped noticing your country before 2022?
Great questions. Okay, so I'm a late 70s baby, so I definitely grew up in the 80s and 90s. Those were nostalgic for me. Those were the times I was in high school, and I look fondly back at those days. So those will always be the days where I think we were doing great. We were working on issues there socially, like racism, and making sure that we treated everybody properly. I know bullying was a big thing that we tackled in school at the time. And then there were some climate issues. I remember acid rain and other stuff really caught my attention as a young man. When I started to switch, though, is when I started realizing that the issues that I was passionate about and getting behind didn't come to fruition. We didn't end up with a big hole in the ozone or acid rain or some of the other problems that kept being thrown at us, like cutting down the rainforest and water levels. And we were talking about global warming at the time. As time went on, it turned into global cooling and then climate change. And then towers came down in New York. And it was like, really, what's going on here? So I started to pay a little bit more close attention to why we're constantly seem to be going through every 3 or 4 years these raises of alarms that we all have to get behind, but they don't actually transpire. So I started seeing a pattern. And even as a young man, when I was first getting involved in it, I had passion, and I believed in helping to save the world, because ultimately we all want to help. But after a while, I started seeing, well, this help isn't doing anything, and these problems aren't becoming problems. So I started to doubt a lot of the narratives. So as I made my way through my 20s and 30s, starting to focus on building up my life with my wife and building a place where we could bring in some children, that's when my attention started to change more towards the future and less on the now and the actual making sure that we can get things prepared for the family, the coming family. And around 2012 is when I think I reached the pinnacle of my paying attention to mainstream media like CNN, CBC, and the others. And throughout that year, I found myself getting more and more concerned. And I knew that 2012 wasn't going to be the end because of a Mayan calendar. Although if you remember that particular year, you kept getting reminded that that's coming, and you could start to feel the emotional response to the concerns around that. And I rejected it at that point. I rejected the narrative. I rejected the fear that was being built because it felt repetitive, especially around September 11th and then the Iraq war, and then we had Afghanistan war and all that stuff. It felt very repetitive. So in 2012 is when I actually turned back to God and kind of spent my time reconnecting with my faith. And I found that was a perfect release for me, where I no longer felt compelled to tackle all the problems of the world in order to prepare for my children. And that was the pivot for me, because then shortly after that, 2014, I had my first son, and we started to focus on actually building out our family and not worrying so much about when the world told us it was the right time to do it, because that literally was our mindset prior to 2012 as young adults in this crazy world of ours. Do we bring people in to this world when there's wars and other problems? 2012 is when I turned back to faith and said to God, you can guide me from this point on. I totally believe in what you have in plan for me. And then I followed that. And from that point on, I got to be honest with you, I've felt a great relief. Life has been good. We've have our ups and downs, but we've had two beautiful children, and we found ourselves in Alberta, building up our new life, and provided myself with the opportunity to go ahead and try and provide something for my neighbors now with the candidacy run.
So I promise I will, after this, we're going to come to your campaign policies. One question, why a homestead? Like you mentioned you were from Toronto. What changed in you that you yearned to, and for the benefit of the audience, maybe define what a homestead is as well.
Sure. So yeah, we first were in the GTA area. Toronto is where I was living for quite for some time. Met my wife, moved to Mississauga and Brampton. That's where we had my son. And then we actually moved up to east of Ottawa to our first acreage. So we had 1 acre there. It was outside of a small town, and we enjoyed it a lot. Built up a garden, put in an orchard, had a place for the kids. It was a great area for the family to grow up. Then come 2020, we were still there in Ontario, and that's when things started to really fall apart. The school system, they were having lots of strikes at the time, and I have a gifted child, and I also have a child with Down syndrome, so we actually have the beautiful spectrum of children when it comes to their abilities, and the school just wasn't providing that to my children. So one child was being held back, and another child was not getting the attention he needs, and so we decided to start homeschooling. So at that point, we were working on a garden, we were working on our land, and COVID was hitting, so everybody's locked down, and we really got into the groove of making sure we can take care of ourselves. Because as we were watching the world demonstrate to us, there could become times where supplies are issues, being able to get to stores become an issue, and it really gave us a real rude awakening that we really should be a little bit more self-sufficient. We wanted to do a whole bunch of things, but staying in Ontario, it didn't give us that opportunity. Selling in Ontario, moving west, did give us that opportunity. So we were looking for a little bit more land. So we went from 1 acre to 60. And when we found the property, there was nothing built here. So homesteading was something that we spoke about a lot, and we were kind of doing that in Ontario already. But now it gave us the opportunity to build up a house, put it where we wanted, be off grid, put up solar, and then really build up the land so that we could kind of live off of it, teach the boys how to do exactly that, and become self-sufficient members of our community while still connecting to our neighbors. So we know who has the beef and who has the chickens, and we will take care of some of that as well and get some goats. But we built a little micro-community with our neighbors. And it was kind of in response to the concerns around what was happening with COVID and our government interfering in our lives. But it was also a desire to be able to just take care of ourselves. We've always been that type of people. So homesteading's allowed us to do exactly that, where we basically eat and drink everything that we can from our farm before we go and acquire it from town.
So I'm going to use that to segue into my question about your policies. Do you bring that sense of independence and individual responsibility to your campaign or to your endeavor?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the messages that I can share with my neighbors, is to teach them how to become more self-sufficient. Don't rely upon your government. Be more proactive when it comes to taking care of your future, and ensure that you have that security, and remind you that you have that security. Because once you give that up, you don't get it back. Once you give it away to the government, they don't typically give you a refund on your security, your privacy. So you got to hold on to it and learn how to maintain it. And it also gives us another mindset, which means we can do it. It gives us a go-getter type of attitude. So if there's any problem, we can deal with it. You got to clear your driveway to snow? No problem. We don't have city vehicles that come by and clear it. We got to do it. And if we don't, we may not be able to get out. So the go-getter attitude of an independent mindset is what I think I can share with my neighbors. And it also comes to the federal government. I like the federal government to stay out of our business. We can spend a lot more time on a provincial level handling the issues that we should be. And this is kind of why I think my mindset on a federal level will help, because I would like to help separate the dependency that our province and my neighbors have on the federal government. Because that's where I think a lot of overreach and issues have been in our lives, is that particular relationship, the federal government relationship. And that's why I am targeting that as where I can spend my time and help my neighbors.
Let's talk about the federal government and health. From my limited understanding of the Constitution, health is a provincial jurisdiction. And from listening to what Sean Buckley has said, for those that are unfamiliar, he's one of the lead lawyers on the NCI. He said that what the Health Canada is doing is they're using the criminal code to criminalize parts of healthcare that they want to get in. So they're kind of finding a backdoor in. What do you think should be the separation of powers federally? When should they get involved in healthcare and when shouldn't they?
Well, I'm going to take a step further than Sean does, and Sean's a good friend. He's been on the show many times, and I do agree with him on lots of things, but I think he can take this one further. The Health Act of Canada is an illegal act. It needs to be revoked completely. The federal government has no place when it comes to healthcare within Canada, with a small exception if the provinces want to get together to validate it or approve drugs or other parts of the healthcare system, but not at the monetary level. They should not be using money to coerce the provinces to do whatever they need to do. I think they need to stay out of it completely. I think the Healthcare Act of Canada is an illegal act, and it should be revoked immediately. So I'll take it a little bit step further. Tying it to the criminal code, of course, that's one way to cause people to do whatever you need them to do. It's a coercion technique. The government has way too much control when it comes to decisions for our body, and this is one way to do it. Slowly, they're even chipping away at our abilities to do certain things, like take care of our children. If I have a confused child, I can't counsel them back to birth gender. That would be considered a violation of Bill C-4, which is the conversion therapy bill. So even things like that, they're chipping away at parental rights and other things for my own decision making when it comes to my family, that I absolutely think is an overreach, and it is a violation of our Constitution. So those are exactly some of the things I would be targeting right away. It'll be a very tough ask, getting rid of the Healthcare Act of Canada, but at least we need to talk about how it is improper. It is violating provincial sovereignty, and we definitely should be paying attention to this, because it doesn't stop just there. Healthcare is just one of the overreaches that we have to fight back on.
She touched on something else I wanted to talk about, property rights. That's a very, very, very vague term, and people use it in different contexts. But why don't you run with this? Tell us what you think about property rights, and what do you think about parental rights, and roughly the security of the person. I lump those three all together.
Well, I kind of look at it more traditional, the other way around, which is we were born with all these rights and we don't lose them. So it's not something that we should be fighting for. It's something that we give up slowly in certain circumstances. So the actual Constitution and the Charter is an agreement with the government from the people to the government that says in these certain circumstances, you can vitiate our rights or do something about our rights. But by default, if you look at the very first line, it's God-given, and I do believe in that. So when it comes to parental rights, property rights, these are God-given rights that I never gave up, I don't agree to, and I will maintain by executing them. So, for example, one of the parental rights I think all parents should do is get involved in the school system, whether you go to the school board or you participate in programs where the parents get their ideas in, or you go to more of an extreme like we did, and we do homeschooling. So we take care of schooling altogether. So I think as a parent, you should be executing those rights by making sure you stay involved like that. Where you start to lose your rights, for example, parents or even property, is when you don't execute them, and you go ahead and let the government step on them. So, for example, bringing in programs that you wouldn't agree with. But if you don't voice your opinion, then you're kind of giving up your parental rights right there. or guns, or our ability to actually hunt and be able to go target shooting. That's under attack right now. In Alberta, this is something that we love to do, and this is also something we need to do. I've got critters all over my property I need to handle, and I absolutely need to hunt from time to time. So taking that away from me sounds to me like I'm giving a write-up that I didn't agree to. I want to be able to protect myself from bears and animals and stuff like that, and protect my animals as well. So when it comes to that, these are rights that you need to execute. So go and get your PAL. Go make sure that you get your training. Go ahead and own some firearms, because it may come a time where that won't be an option to you because not enough people have been executing it. So the general question is, the rights that we have, we were born with it, and you lose them by not using them. So make sure that as a parent, you get into that school board, or you get into that school and let them know what you think, and make sure that you pay attention. And when it comes to other rights like property rights or firearm rights, you make sure you execute them. So go own property, protect it, go ahead and get firearms, go hunting, go shooting. This is something that you're going to lose if you don't execute it, and we do.
I think that's your campaign slogan right there: use it or lose it.
That could absolutely be something that we need to talk about, whether it's your healthcare choices or provincial sovereignty. Use it or lose it.
What about let's switch gears to housing. So that this sort of housing quote unquote crisis. Give us the Jason Lavigne understanding or interpretation of what has caused the crisis, and what can the federal government do without violating the Constitution, if anything?
Tough question. Okay, so a lot of Alberta housing issues are because we have a lot more people than we planned for and that we can currently support. So around here, there is no vacancies. Everything is taken up. We do welcome a lot of people from outside of Alberta. Alberta is one of the provinces that receive a lot of international movement. So lots of migration from other provinces to Alberta. Plus, outside our borders, Alberta seems to be quite the hot place for the federal government to invite new Canadians to, especially our cities at Edmonton and Calgary. As a consequence, our system is strained when it comes to housing. We don't have enough current inventory for everybody, so we have to build. But we're also held back on that. We have some intervention by the federal government when it comes to affordability. They just finished canceling the new homeowners program, so it's going to be a lot more difficult for younger people to do exactly that. Of course, the cost of living has been going a lot higher than the wages, so we certainly can't afford as much as we used to be able to, which is another knock on our young people who are not going to be able to have the affordability that we had growing up to get into our own properties. So these are a couple of the issues here when it comes to the housing in Alberta. We have a lot of Canadians that are coming to join us, which we love to see you come, and then we have a lot of newcomers from outside the country making their way to our cities, which is making the problem a little bit bigger. Now, how we can tackle it is we certainly have to build a lot more properties and make it available to the next generation of Canadians, young Canadians, and even the newcomers. And we also have to make sure that we're not overextending our generosity. Alberta is a very generous province. Quebec knows this. We certainly share a lot of our wealth around, but we also have finite resources. So we do have to be a little bit smarter when it comes to the planning of that. We can be generous, but it shouldn't be coming at the cost of all our neighbors. We can tighten our belt a little bit in Alberta, but not too tight that we break our back and we can't help ourselves. So when it comes to those issues, I think moderation is part of the solution, and we absolutely need to get back to work and building a lot more when it comes to housing.
And your answers are actually all really spot on, and it's almost as if you and I rehearsed these questions.
No, you gave me a heads up, but to be honest with you, I'm pretty busy. So I like to be an honest person and an open book. So I hope that's what my neighbors see here, because that's exactly what I plan to offer.
Well, it's good stuff. Another tough question for you, Jason. In the last three and a half years, Joe Biden's let in, I believe, 7.9 million. I'm going to call them illegals just to irritate him and get under his skin. So about 8 million. We're a tenth of their population. We let in 1.2 million last year. So corrected for the population, we let in 12 million in 1 year. Contrast that with 8 million in 3.5. What are your views on that? How do you think that's going to impact the country? And What do we do about it?
Well, you're not wrong. Okay, on a per capita basis, Canada brings in more newcomers than anywhere else in the world. We seem to have a very open door policy because we're a very generous country. We do care about humanity, and in general, we do care about people. Unfortunately, though, I don't think I have to answer your question of how it will turn out because we can look at it now. It already is turning out now. We have 10 cities. We have people who can't get into housing. We certainly have people being crowded into housing. We're hearing, unfortunately, stories where people are harmed or injured in fires because of overcrowding. We certainly have an issue when it comes to being able to support the rest of the community. It's pretty full when it comes to resources on social assistance and other programs. We are seeing the strain now. So if we continue with this 12.5% to 3% increase of our population every year, you're going to expect this to just compound and get a lot worse. Now, what I'd like to see happen is a different quality of newcomer, and we have to really make sure that we can turn around the production within this country from the newcomers themselves as well. So construction workers, plumbers, electricians, we should be pre-training them, training them in the countries they're coming from, doing other things like education, getting education out there, and offering that to people as a prerequisite before coming to the country and as a requirement when you're in the country to train up. Basically train up so that you can help support the next generation that's coming after you. But at 2.5%, we're not growing fast enough when it comes to our ability to support that many people. So whether it's meant to strain the system or whether or not to find out whether or not we are going to strain the system, I think we have our answers. We're strained, and we absolutely have to pay close attention to this right now, or it will become more of an issue. And what we saw in the Toronto area and a lot of places in Ontario, it became not affordable for anybody. $1 million homes was the norm. So that's what you could see happening across Canada if we continue this. So we don't have to wait. I think the indicators are already there. It's a bad idea. It's too many people, and we really need to get to work. And that includes newcomers as well, if we're going to continue to do this.
You mentioned something. I want to go back to the housing crisis. So you got the shortage of housing, and that's another issue, regulation, or all these reasons, immigration. But the astronomical cost of some of these properties, like it's a shoebox in Toronto, and it's $1 million. I was having a conversation with someone earlier today about the difference between money and value. If I buy a house and I buy it for $1 million and I sell it to you for 1.1 million, you'd sell it back to me for 1.2, and we on and on we go. It's like, and in a couple of years, it's a $5 million house, but no value has been added. Is like what's going on in your opinion?
Well, you're talking about the market, supply and demand, what someone's willing to pay. It's always been a question I've always wondered, because when I look at cost of businesses or the value of businesses, they change daily, and they can go like 20%. Like Apple can all of a sudden be $1 billion more valuable than it was yesterday. But that's the market. That's the market for sure. So supply and demand. And when you have a much larger demand than you have a supply, this is exactly what you see happen. Small shoebox type of properties are sold for outrageous prices. But another part of that problem is that demand is also being artificially created. So you'll actually end up having people come in, and two families will come together to bid on a property, and then another large family will bid. So now a single family home is actually going to a multi-family dwelling, and now that's what's pushing the market price, is because two families can afford a little bit more than the single family can. So there's even some artificial problems within the system when we allow that to happen. You would get priced out. You get priced out by people who are willing to spend a little bit more because they're willing to share their property when it's not really what that property is meant for. I don't want to say bigger government is the solution here, because that's the opposite direction where I want to go with this. So I do want to see places like the real estate boards picking up slack here. I do want to see some of the rules that are around single-family dwellings become enforced, so they stay single-family dwellings that can be single-family affordable. Because when you let those particular lines, bend, this is exactly what you have. You get price wars, you get markets where it's artificially pushed up, and then becomes inaffordable for most people.
I always laugh when I'm talking about something serious. It's my coping mechanism.
Okay, cool.
the BC NDP in this province, like every day it's another issue. It's like a mini version of Justin Trudeau with his ethics scandals. So in BC, they've run the hospitals into the ground, so the healthcare system. I'll give you one perfect example. If I go to a clinic in Vancouver, there's a sign on the wall that says, like, I'm only allowed to talk about one issue per visit. It's like completely Soviet.
Wow.
That's not a joke. That actually happened. That happens. And then, so they to cover that up, they turn around and they're trying to fix the housing. They're going to make it worse, but they're trying to fix the housing crisis. So now they have mandatory minimum density. So before we had single unit dwelling, whatever, single family dwelling. Now you have like 4. So I don't know what's going to happen. They're basically densifying everything, and like what's your perception? Is it the immigration? Like, is it just all of a sudden the volume of people has increased, or is it regulation?
I also want to put dependency on there as well. So a lot of Canadians that are becoming more dependent on their government, so they require more housing too, is a problem as well. Traditionally, we had a society that would work hard and go and get enough money to go ahead and get themselves a house. But now we have a generation where they're looking at things like UBI and other types of programs to take care of them. So within our country, we already have people becoming more dependent on the government, which is adding to the housing problem. Then we also have mental health and other issues, which is causing people to be unable to work, which is causing issues to the problem. And then you also tack into that newcomers. So we have large numbers of different groups all fighting for the same square foot of housing when it comes to government supply. We got to reverse that by getting these people back to work. You got to, again, with the rights, use it or lose it. If you're not helping build the economy, not helping be productive members of society, then we don't have that class or that group of people who are providing the housing for everybody else. So we got to work harder at getting newcomers to work. We got to get our Canadians healthy again so that they're back to work. And we got to reinvigorate that spirit that you can produce a lot more than your government will ever be able to provide for you. So get that mentality, that mindset back, to have a bunch of doers in this country. If we do that, we'll have less people that need that type of housing. That will free up the market as well when it comes to availability. And then we'll produce larger homes, larger properties, larger communities that can support more people.
That's a good point. I never thought about that, the dependency issue.
Yeah, we're adding more people to the problem by making them more dependent on housing like that. It's a cycle. As a pilot, is one of the things we worry about is getting stuck into a spiral, and sometimes you don't even notice it when you're in it, and then boom, it's too late. So you got to realize when you're stuck into a spiral, and there's only one direction on that, and that's down.
Well, there's a pilot analogy joke in there somewhere, but it'll come to me.
Sure.
What about you said mental health? Let's switch over to drugs. So I'm kind of. How much of this do you think it's there's a libertarian argument that, you know, it's your body, you can put whatever you want into your body, and how much of it is should it be regulated? Like, do you think we should be regulating marijuana? What are your thoughts? And then take it to opiates, obviously.
Well, on the libertarian front or home front, I couldn't manufacture cocaine or some hard drugs, so that would have to come from an industry. That wouldn't be something that qualified, I would think, under the libertarian mindset of your body, your choice. It's not something you could just produce. You require an industry to do that. And when you do that, then I think the argument changes a little bit, like get rid of the industry. When it comes to things like tobacco and other things like marijuana and stuff like that, if you can produce it, then it fits within the libertarian mindset. I don't mind that my neighbors do what they do as long as they keep it to themselves and don't cause problems. Don't tread on me is basically the attitude. But I also want to help encourage a healthy lifestyle and a healthy mindset because having strong, healthy adults is a way to have a strong, healthy community. And ensuring that you don't need mechanisms to cope, possibly would be where I would want to put some of the attention there. Having fun with your friends, you're growing up enjoying yourself, that's one thing. But when you get to the point where it becomes coping and it becomes a daily thing for you, this is where I would like to focus on assisting those people to find other ways to go ahead and cope, because a stronger mindset and a stronger body is a good way to have a stronger community, which is the foundation to raising your children in a good place and being able to provide for the next generation.
What about in the context of, I don't want to exaggerate this, but in BC, they're basically doing safe supply for fentanyl, and it's finding its way into the hands of kids. I'm not saying they're giving it to the kids. Is fentanyl like a step too far? Like at this point, like if they start giving sarin gas, is that acceptable?
I think that's a tough question because in Alberta we don't have that. It might be making its way here to Edmonton soon, and it's a really difficult question, a very tough one. But when you have a country that has a program called MAIDS, so Medical Assistance in Dying, I don't think that the country as a whole is really looking at helping people. They're looking at helping numb people and then helping people make the ultimate decision. So I do think that there is some room there for some more discussions on whether or not this is really helpful. Just kind of like early COVID, where we weren't sure what to do the first few weeks or so. We're past that stage now when it comes to fentanyl and some of these other harder drugs in the BC area, because we can see the effects now. We can start seeing some of these programs, maybe they started from a good place and they had good intentions, but in practice, it's not actually panning out. I am very concerned, of course, when children are able to get their hands on things that harm them in any way, shape, or form. At the same time, we are also a country that would allow them to get puberty blockers and some other types of drugs, which are just as devastating to the body as even fentanyl is. It may not kill you right away, but it certainly kills the body and part of your soul as well. So I do think we have other issues on top of that. To really, if we wanted to start protecting our children, we got to take it seriously. And if we hear stories like this, and of course we know it's going to happen, we've been having these protect your children from even store-bought over-the-counter stuff for years. Medicine cabinets are a dangerous place. These aren't new lessons that we're learning here. So I think there's another issue here, and that's really trying to protect the children. Now, healthy adults and healthy minds would assist with all the other problems. So drug use can be a disease, and it's actually an addiction is according to the Supreme Court, is a disease. So we do have to work with that and try and help people. But at the same time, making supplies and certain things readily available and easily accessible to younger groups is an indicator that we're doing something wrong here. We're not protecting the children, and they should be coming first on this particular issue.
So we got about roughly 15 minutes left, so it's not enough time to go line by line for every ludicrous policy the Liberal Party is pursuing. So I'm gonna lump them all together. MAID, puberty blockers, and Arif Virani coming out with his minority report, the law to go after thought. Maybe not all of it is. What do you think their motivation is for doing this? Do they hate the country? Do they think the country should go in a Soviet direction? What's going on?
I do believe it's a power issue, and I do believe it's because they believe they're part of a global consortium who's working on larger issues than they believe that we have the right to understand and know about. I do think they think that they're doing the right things by making some of these policy changes, but I also think that they don't understand what they're doing. I think that they're compartmentalized. They maybe have a little wedge of the pie, and they don't understand the entire pie. The entire pie, I believe, is a globalist agenda to go ahead and vitiate and remove our rights slowly so that we become a very conforming and very willing to comply society, to make sure that they are able to guide us and direct us in the path that they see fit. Unfortunately for us, I don't believe our needs line up well to what the globalists are willing to provide to us. I believe that our needs are a little bit more important to us individually. We can't be handled like on a global scale, and we're very regionally based humans. So what happens around us is what's the most important thing, not necessarily what the entire world needs. Whether that's part of the human nature or not, being able to know where my food comes from for the next few days is my top priority, the security of my family. So that's where I would want to spend a little bit more time focusing on. Now, when it comes to the Liberals, Bill 63 is something that we're focused on right now, which is the Online Harms Act, which is meant to This is how they bring these in sometimes. They bring in these policies under good reasons, but then they tack on something that isn't good. In this case, we always want to protect our children, and I spoke heavily on that one. And we do have a lot of laws in place already under the criminal code to do a lot of the things that this bill is proposing. But what it's adding, which is something that is very new to us, is the reasonable likelihood of causing hate or harm is going to be something that you can be charged with under this new bill. You can receive a peace bond, which is very similar to bail conditions. So house arrest, you can't associate with certain people, you can't own firearms, you can be put under conditions like that just because a judge has decided that reasonably there's a likelihood that you may offend. That's a new type of law that we haven't had before. Normally we have the act, so let's say murder, and then you try to do it, which would be attempted murder, and then maybe you tell somebody you're going to do it, which would be threatening murder, and then maybe you're going to talk about it, which would be conspiring to commit murder. But we've never had one where it was a charge for maybe you will one day. So this is a very big concern. As we've seen with many issues, for example, pronouns being required to use compelled speech, and what that could actually turn into, which can turn into jail terms for people. As we saw that slippery slope happen, we should fully understand that this particular bill is doing exactly the same thing. What may come off as for most people you agree with will quickly slide into something that most people would not agree with. And MAIDS is another example of that. When MAIDS first came, it was for the terminally ill, the ones in pain. There was no other solution. This was a humanitarian thing to be very compassionate at end of life. Now it's slid all the way to we're arguing about mature minors and we're arguing about dementia patients. And to a lot of us, that is a common mechanism of these liberal policies where they come in someplace where you do understand, and then eventually they slide to a place where most people would not understand. And I do think that Bill 63, the Online Harms Act, is going to do exactly that. What is a harm? What is hate? And then what is reasonable likelihood? These are not finite answers. We don't have a definition of those. Those are going to be exactly what the judge says they are at that moment in time. And that's my concern, because our justice system is built on who's better at debating and arguing. And it's also who's got the most money. It's going to be a very difficult fight. And I do think that this is just a step in the wrong direction. And I do want to find ways to make this particular issue, Bill 63, front and center for Canadians so they understand. It's going to mean anything that you ever consider doing at some point will be considered hate by somebody. And then if there's a reasonable likelihood that you might do that, then you could be looking at things like conditions. And then if you break those conditions, you could be looking at jail. So these are mechanisms to really target people, to control their behavior, and make sure that they understand that even if they were considering doing something, they better not. Because if you do anything that indicates that you have a reasonable likelihood of potentially committing hate, that's enough for you to get yourself within the legal system. And once you're in the legal system, it's very difficult to get out, and it's very easy to find yourself into more trouble. You could breach a bail condition without realizing it. Maybe you're just 10 minutes late, but that's enough to go pick you up and put you in jail. So this is a major concern. I think it's going to turn innocent people into criminals one way or another. So I do want to fight against policies like that, because the Liberals have a long track record of coming in here and then sliding down to here at some point. So this one has my concern for sure.
Well, nobody can claim that you don't know anything about the law. You're clearly you're a well-educated man when it comes to understanding these things. So if I was in your riding, I'd vote for you.
Well, there's still time, but I think your riding needs you. I am very excited that you're running as well. I've gotten to know you a little bit around the Mosley decision and some other time we spent together. And BC's got some good people, so I'm happy to see that. We don't normally get a lot of good information out of BC out into Alberta, but every once in a while we get one like you. So thank you for sharing that with me.
You're too kind. Mr. Lavigne, we're coming to the end of the show. Is there... I always like to end on a message of hope and optimism. So if you're hopeful for something good happening in Canada, or if you want to encourage other Canadians to run, I'll give you the last word.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much for that. Yes, if you are even considering running for the PPC party, for the independent party, or even maybe you're going to try and get into one of the major parties and fix it up, try it. Go for it. Now's the time. There's a huge appetite in Canada for change. So we do want to see something different. So PPC, independent, other parties are starting to make a lot of headway and get a lot of attention. And if you want to start smaller but have a bigger voice, start at your school board. Go ahead and get involved with your library. Make sure that your city or town council has representation. Support the current incumbent or replace them if you feel that they're not doing the work for you. And do show up. Make sure that your voice is heard. The more people out there showing themselves and having themselves heard is how we make sure that people in power understand that the pressure really comes from the people. When there's a lack of pressure from the people, that's when other types of pressure, like political pressure, starts to interfere with people. So make sure you get out there, and I know we can do it. 2024 is a year of accountability. The first 3 months have shown us that we can get good decisions. The Mosley decision was a pivotal one for Canada, and we're absolutely looking at a lot more cases in the legal system, which has a lot of teeth to it, and we do think we're going to get some good results. So 2024 is the year of accountability. So keep that head up high, and remember, there are people like Payman and myself working really hard for you every day to make sure that your voice is heard and you are represented.
Jason, I'm just going to hold you over after the end of the show, but I wanted to thank you for coming on, and I guess Canada owes you a big thank you for everything that you're doing, and you're inspiring millions of Canadians. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, and you too. I really appreciate your time today, and this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Goodbye, everyone.